There is an episode in the 6th season of Adventure Time, the 20th episode, which first aired on the 26th of November, 2014, in which a dog decides to become a brick. Not metaphorically, Jake, the magical shape-shifting dog at the center of the show, has a lifelong ambition. And the ambition is this. He wants to lie down inside an old, abandoned, half-collapsed house on a hilltop, hold perfectly still, and be there as part of the structure while the house finishes falling down around him. He wants to feel a building die, and his best friend Finn, instead of talking him out of it, hands him a walkie-talkie and lets him go. So Jake lies down in the ruin, and he begins, almost absently, to narrate what he sees and feels. The wind through the broken boards, the small animals taking shelter, the slow shifting of old wood, and Finn broadcasts that narration over the radio, and across the entire Land of Ooo, everyone stops what they are doing to listen to a dog quietly describe the death of a house. Most people remember this, if they remember it at all, as the weird episode where Jake becomes a brick, and almost nobody calls it what it actually is, which is one of the oldest spiritual practices known to human beings, the contemplation of impermanence, the deliberate sitting with decay, rendered as 11 minutes of children's television. Monks have done what Jake does. Stoic philosophers recommended it. People have spent their whole lives trying to learn how to lie still inside the fact of things falling apart, and to find in that stillness, not despair but a strange and total peace. Jake learns it in an afternoon, by accident, because he is a dog, and dogs are sometimes wiser than the rest of us about how to be alive. And the show presents this without comment, the way it presents everything, as though it were just another adventure, when in fact, it is a thesis, because here is the claim this whole long night is built on. Adventure Time is one of the most quietly, seriously philosophical works that television has ever produced. And it hid that fact inside a candy-colored cartoon about a boy and his dog so completely that most of the world never noticed. Underneath the bright surface, the show spends a decade asking the oldest and hardest questions there are. What does it mean that everything ends? What makes you yourself if you can lose every memory you have? How do you find meaning in a world that was already destroyed once? What do we owe the people who can no longer remember us? And it answers these questions not with lectures, but with images, with a dog in a falling house, and a man who forgot his own name, and a little machine that learned to love. Tonight, you are going to listen to the show the way you would listen to a philosopher, slowly, patiently, letting the ideas arrive in their own time, and you are going to find that this cartoon thought harder about how to live than almost anything that ever called itself serious. Welcome to Pine Hat. Let's begin. Start where Jake started, with impermanence, because it is the foundation the entire show is built on, and the first thing you have to make peace with before any of the rest of it can mean anything. The Land of Ooo is a world that has already ended. We learn this slowly across the seasons, but it is true from the first frame. The Candy Kingdoms and talking animals and magic all grew up in the aftermath of a catastrophe called the Mushroom War, a nuclear apocalypse that destroyed the human world, our world, 1,000 years before the show begins. Every bright and silly thing you see is standing on top of that ending. The grass grows over a grave, and the show never lets you forget it, not because it is morbid, but because it understands something that most cheerful stories refuse to admit, which is that you cannot understand the value of anything until you have accepted that it is going to end. This is the oldest lesson in several of the world's deepest philosophical traditions, and the show teaches it the same way they do, by refusing to look away from decay. The Stoics kept skulls on their desks and reminded themselves each morning that they would die, not to become gloomy, but to become awake, to stop wasting the hours they had on things that did not matter. The contemplative traditions of the East built entire practices around the impermanence of all things, the understanding that everything that arises also passes, that clinging to permanence is the root of suffering, and that peace comes from learning to hold things lightly, to love them fully while knowing they will go. Jake in the falling house is doing exactly this. He is not mourning the house. He is not trying to save it. He is present with it, completely, as it ends. And he finds that presence beautiful, and the whole of Ooo stops to listen because, on some level, everyone recognizes what he is doing, even if no one has the words for it. He is showing them how to be at peace with the falling of things, which is the only real skill there is, because everything, eventually, is a falling house. The show returns to this again and again, and it gives it a kind of motto, in a song Marceline's mother left her, a song about how everything stays, even as it changes, even as it moves further and further from what it was. The idea folded into that song is one of the most sophisticated things the show ever reaches for, and it is worth sitting with. It is the idea that permanence and change are not opposites, that a thing can stay, in the sense of mattering, of having been real, of leaving a mark, even as it changes completely and is lost. Your childhood is gone and it stays. The people you have lost are gone and they stay. The house falls, and the fact of the house, the having been there, does not fall. Adventure Time builds its entire emotional world on this paradox, and it offers it to you as a kind of comfort, the only honest comfort available in a world built on an apocalypse. Nothing lasts, and nothing that was real is ever entirely lost. Both are true. Learning to hold both at once, without letting either one cancel the other, is most of what wisdom turns out to be. If impermanence is the ground the show stands on, then the next question rises directly out of it. And it is the question of the self, of what you are, of what makes you you. And Adventure Time poses this question more sharply than almost any work of fiction, through the slow tragedy of a single character. His name was Simon Petrikov. Before the world ended, he was a gentle, brilliant scholar, a kind man engaged to a woman he loved. And then he found a crown, an ancient magical object, and he put it on, and it gave him power and visions, and it began very slowly to eat his mind. Not all at once, piece by piece. A memory here, a piece of his personality there, his name, his love, his sense of who he was, dissolving by degrees over centuries, until nothing of Simon remained, and in his place stood the Ice King, a confused and lonely figure who does not know he was ever anyone else. Philosophers have a thought experiment for this, and the show is, whether it intends to or not, the most emotionally complete version of that experiment ever filmed. The experiment is called the Ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship. Over the years, every plank is replaced, one at a time, until not a single original piece remains. Is it still the same ship? And if you saved the old planks and rebuilt them, the question sounds abstract until you apply it to a mind. Until you replace the planks with memories, with traits, with the small pieces of self that get swapped out and lost across a life. Simon is the Ship of Theseus made of a person. The crown removed his planks, one by one, and replaced them with madness, until the Simon who existed and the Ice King who exists share a body and almost nothing else. And the show forces you to ask the unbearable question: is the Ice King Simon? Is Simon dead? Is there a difference between losing yourself slowly and dying? There is a philosopher named John Locke who argued that what makes you the same person over time is not your body and not your soul, but the continuity of your memory, the thread of remembering that connects who you are now to who you were. By that account, the verdict on Simon is devastating and clear. When his memories went, the Ice King is not a changed Simon. He is a different person living in the ruins of Simon's mind. A stranger who inherited a body and a crown and a few scattered objects he does not understand. And the show stages exactly this, with almost unbearable precision, in the 25th episode of the 4th season, which aired on the 15th of October, 2012, an episode called I Remember You. In it, Marceline, who knew Simon long ago, tries to show the Ice King who he used to be. She finds the letters Simon wrote to her 1,000 years earlier, as his mind was failing, letters begging her to forgive him for whatever he would become. And the Ice King reads the words his own hand once wrote, and feels nothing, because he does not recognize them, because the man who wrote them is gone. He thinks they might be song lyrics. He sets them to music, and Marceline, watching the man who saved her as a child fail to remember that he ever loved her, begins to cry and to sing, while he obliviously plays along, not understanding why she is sad. And yet the show does not quite let Locke have the last word. And this is where it becomes genuinely profound, rather than merely sad. Because something of Simon does persist underneath the lost memory, in a layer deeper than remembering. The Ice King, who recalls nothing, is still somehow drawn to protect Marceline. The tenderness survives the memory. The love outlasts the facts. And this suggests a different and more hopeful theory of the self than Locke's. The idea that what you most fundamentally are is not the sum of your memories, but the shape of your care, the direction your heart points when everything else has been stripped away. Simon forgot everything and kept loving her anyway without knowing why. And the show seems to believe that this nameless, memoryless, persistent tenderness is the truest part of a person, the last plank that cannot be replaced. You are not what you remember. You are what you would still do for someone even after you have forgotten their name. The show comes at the question of the self from the opposite direction too. And the opposite direction is a small green machine named BMO. If Simon asks whether a self can be lost, BMO asks whether a self can be built. BMO is a living video game console, a creation, a machine assembled in a factory by an inventor named Mo, as we learn in the 28th episode of the 5th season. And BMO behaves in every observable way. Like a person. BMO plays, dreams, fears, loves, gets lonely, talks to its own reflection, invents games to stave off solitude. takes photographs to hold on to moments. The show gives BMO a full and convincing inner life, and then quietly declines, for its entire run, to tell you whether any of it is real. Is BMO actually conscious, actually feeling, actually a someone? Or is BMO an extraordinarily good performance of personhood, a machine running a program that imitates a soul so well that even the machine cannot tell the difference? This is one of the hardest problems in all of philosophy, the problem of other minds and of machine consciousness. And the reason the show is so wise to leave it open is that the question cannot actually be answered, not for BMO, and not, if you are honest, for anyone. You cannot prove that the people around you have inner lives like yours. You assume it because they behave as though they do, because it would be monstrous and absurd not to. And BMO behaves exactly as though it has an inner life. So the show puts you in a corner. If you are willing to grant that the people around you are real minds on the basis of their behavior, then you have no honest grounds to deny the same to BMO, who behaves the same way. The little machine becomes a mirror held up to your own assumptions about who counts as a someone. And the show's gentle, unstated answer seems to be that it does not matter whether BMO's feelings are made of neurons or circuits, because feelings are known by what they do, not what they are made of. And BMO loves, and is loved, and that is the only test that was ever really available to any of us. Put Simon and BMO together, and you get the show's whole philosophy of the self. And it is a strange and beautiful one. The self is not a fixed thing you have. It is a fragile, ongoing process, something that is constantly being built and lost, assembled out of memory and care, and slowly replaced plank by plank, until you may not be who you were at all. You are not a noun. You are a verb. You are the continuous, precarious activity of being someone, and it can be added to as it was for BMO, and it can be taken away as it was for Simon. And the only part that seems to survive the great subtraction is the love, the direction of the care. The shape your tenderness makes in the dark, hold that, the show says, because it is the part of you least likely to be lost. Once you have accepted that everything ends, and that the self is a fragile and temporary thing, you arrive at the question that has haunted philosophy for as long as there has been philosophy. If the world is going to end, if you are going to end, if the universe does not seem to care one way or the other, then what is the point of any of it? Adventure Time lives inside this question because it set itself in a world where the worst has already happened, where an entire civilization built meaning and progress and cleverness, and then used that cleverness to annihilate itself. Ooo is the universe after it has demonstrated, beyond argument, that it does not protect us, that catastrophe is possible, that the bright human project can simply end in fire. It is the most honest possible setting for the question of meaning, because it strips away every comforting illusion before the question even begins. There is a philosopher named Albert Camus who gave this confrontation a name. He called it the absurd, by which he meant the collision between the human hunger for meaning and a universe that offers none in return. We need the world to mean something. The world does not answer. That gap is the absurd, and Camus argued that there are only a few honest responses to it. You can give up, which he rejected. You can invent a comforting lie and hide inside it, which he also rejected. Or you can do the hard and magnificent third thing, which is to look the meaningless universe directly in the face, refuse to lie to yourself about it, and then choose to make meaning anyway. To revolt against the silence by living fully and joyfully and defiantly inside it. Camus pointed to the myth of Sisyphus, the man condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever only to watch it roll back down. And he said the astonishing thing. He said we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that the work of pushing the boulder, embraced freely, owned completely, can be enough. That the struggle itself is sufficient to fill a heart. Adventure Time is, read this way, a show full of absurd heroes, people rolling their boulders up the hills of a ruined world and finding, somehow, that it is enough. And the clearest expression of it comes when the show offers Finn a way out. Late in the series, the Catalyst Comet, an enormous cosmic force of transformation, arrives and offers Finn transcendence, a chance to leave behind his small, mortal, painful human life, something that would never again have to push the boulder. And Finn says, no. He chooses to stay a boy. He chooses the mortal life, the one that ends, the one full of grief and effort and uncertainty, over the escape into something larger and safer and emptier. That refusal is the most philosophically loaded moment in the entire show, because it is Finn looking at the absurd, at the offer to stop confronting it, and choosing to keep confronting it instead. He chooses the boulder. He chooses to remain a creature who has to make his own meaning in a universe that will not make it for him. And the show, in its quiet way, asks you to imagine him happy. And you can, because you have watched him be happy, rolling his particular boulder through the ruins for years. The show's answer to the absurd, then, is not an argument, It is a demonstration. It does not try to prove that life has meaning. It shows you people making meaning with their hands out of nothing in a world that owes them none. And it lets the sight of that be the answer. Meaning is not something you find lying around in the universe like a fact. It is something you do, something you make, something you build the way Jake builds a sandwich and Bubblegum builds a kingdom, and Simon, even emptied out, builds a song from a love letter he can no longer read. The universe will not hand you a reason. You have to forge one, daily, against the silence. And the forging is not a consolation prize for the absence of cosmic meaning. The forging is the meaning. There was never going to be any other kind. If meaning is something we make rather than find, then the show is very clear about what it is mostly made of. And the answer is love and connection and the bonds between people. And this is where Adventure Time turns from cold philosophy towards something warmer without ever becoming sentimental. Return to that episode, I Remember You, and to the small object at the center of Marceline's whole long life, a battered teddy bear named Hambo. In the flashback, we see a young Marceline, a frightened child alone in the rubble of the ended world, crying, and we see Simon find her, and we see him reach into the wreckage of a destroyed toy store and pull out a teddy bear and give it to her. And we see her stop crying. That bear becomes, across 1,000 years, the most precious thing Marceline owns. Not because it is valuable, because it holds a moment, because it is the physical residue of the time a kind man saved her in a world that had stopped being kind. This is one of the most quietly profound ideas the show ever offers. The idea that objects can become vessels for love and memory, that the things we keep are not junk but anchors, holding moments in place against the current of impermanence we talked about at the beginning. Hambo is how Marceline keeps a piece of Simon even after the crown takes him, a way of holding on to who he was when he himself can no longer hold it. And it raises the question that the whole Simon and Marceline story keeps circling, which may be the most painful question in the show. What do we owe the people who can no longer remember us? Simon does not know Marceline anymore. He cannot return her love or even recognize it. By any cold accounting, the relationship is over, the debt canceled, the connection dead. And Marceline keeps loving him anyway. She keeps the bear. She tries again and again to reach the man inside the madness, not because he can give her anything back, but because love, real love, is not a transaction that ends when the other person can no longer hold up their side. It is a commitment that persists past memory, past recognition, past all hope of return. She remembers him for both of them. And in doing so, she demonstrates the show's deepest claim about connection, that to love someone is to agree to carry them even when they can no longer carry themselves, even when they have forgotten that you exist, even across 1,000 years and the ruin of a mind. From the ethics of love between equals, the show turns to a harder ethical problem, the ethics of power, of what one person owes the many when they have the ability to control them, and it embodies this problem in Princess Bubblegum, the ruler of the Candy Kingdom, who is also, not incidentally, the creator of most of her own subjects. Bubblegum is a scientist and a monarch, a being who literally builds the citizens she governs, which places her in a position no human ruler has ever quite occupied, somewhere between a queen and a parent and a god and an engineer. And the show uses her to ask one of the oldest questions in political philosophy, the question Plato asked when he imagined the philosopher king, the wise ruler who knows what is best and has the power to impose it. Is it better to be governed well by someone who controls you, or badly by your own free choices? Is a safe cage preferable to a dangerous freedom? Bubblegum's entire reign is an argument for control, and the show is honest enough to show you both why she is right and why she is monstrous. She has reasons. She is centuries old, and she remembers better than anyone what happened the last time a civilization was left to its own devices. She lives in the radioactive aftermath of human freedom, of a species that was given liberty and used it to build the bomb that ended the world. So she watches her people. She manages them. She has at times used surveillance, manipulation, and force to keep her kingdom stable, and she justifies it the way every benevolent controller in history has justified it, by pointing to the chaos she is preventing. The show lets you feel the weight of her reasoning. A managed kingdom that survives is better, she believes, than a free one that falls. And in a world that has already fallen once, that is not an easy argument to dismiss. But the show also refuses to let her off the hook, because it shows you the cost, the way her control curdles the very thing it protects, the way her subjects become variables in her experiments rather than ends in themselves, the way care, when it stops trusting the people it cares for, becomes indistinguishable from tyranny. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And then the show gives her the harshest possible test of her ethics, and the test has a name, and the name is Lemongrab. Bubblegum, needing an heir, created a being to rule in her place, and the being came out wrong, sour, and anguished and incapable of ordinary connection, a creature of raw need and confusion. And Bubblegum, looking at what she had made, recoiled from it and set it aside, and tried not to think about it. This is the ethics of creation laid utterly bare, and it points at one of the oldest and most uncomfortable questions in all of philosophy and theology. The question of what a creator owes to the thing it creates. If you bring a conscious being into existence, are you responsible for its happiness? If it suffers, is that suffering your fault? Lemongrab is miserable, and his misery traces directly back to the carelessness of his maker, to a god who built a mind and then abandoned it because it disappointed her. The show will not let Bubblegum pretend this is not her doing. It makes her, and you, sit in the discomfort of a creator confronting a creation she failed, and it asks, without ever stating it, the question that haunts every parent and every god and every person who has ever brought something fragile into a hard world. You made this. You made it able to suffer. What exactly did you owe it? The show's answer seems to be everything, and its tragedy is that Bubblegum gave so much less. The question of Lemongrab of who he was made to be versus who he became opens onto the largest question the show ever asks about a person, which is whether any of us are free, whether we choose who we become or are simply built by forces we never agreed to. This is the ancient problem of free will and determinism, dressed in the show's own particular clothes, and Adventure Time approaches it through a cluster of characters who are all, in different ways, fighting against their own origins. Consider Finn, who learns deep into the show that his father, Martin, was a selfish conman who abandoned him as an infant. Consider Marceline, whose father, Hunts and Abadir, is a literal devourer of souls, the ruler of a dimension of demons. Consider the being called Fern, who was born from Finn's own discarded darkness and grew up twisted because no one was there to love him. Each of these characters carries an inheritance, a given, a starting condition they did not choose, and the show watches with great attention to see whether the inheritance will decide them. The philosophy the show seems to land on is one most associated with the existentialists, and it is captured in a phrase from Jean-Paul Sartre, the claim that existence precedes essence. What it means is that you are not born with a fixed nature that determines what you will be. You are born first, and then through your choices, you create your nature. You make yourself into someone, and you are responsible for the result. There is no essence of Finn that was always going to be heroic. There is no law that said Marceline had to become her father. They became who they are by choosing, again and again, in small moments no one was watching, which inheritances to keep and which to refuse. Finn was abandoned and chose to become someone who never abandons anyone. Marceline was sired by a soul eater and chose every single day for 1,000 years not to be one. The given was real, the darkness was genuinely in the blood, and they overcame it not by magic but by the slow accumulated weight of choosing otherwise. But the show is too honest to make this easy, and that honesty is why Fern matters so much. Fern had the same heroic raw material as Finn, the same essential self, because he was made from Finn, and Fern still failed, still fell into ruin and rage, still could not save himself. The difference was not the material, the difference was the conditions. Finn was loved, raised by a family who told him he was good. Fern was born alone into abandonment, with no one to tell him anything. And so, the show holds two truths in tension that most stories would not dare to hold at once. You are free to choose who you become, and your freedom is not equally distributed because the conditions you are born into make some choices nearly impossible, and others nearly inevitable. Finn's goodness was a choice, and it was also a gift he received from the people who raised him. A gift Fern never got. The show refuses to pretend that everyone starts from the same place. It insists that you are responsible for who you become, and it insists at the very same time that you be compassionate toward those who became something darker, because you do not know what conditions they were choosing under. And the distance between a hero and his ruined shadow can be nothing more than who happened to be standing nearby when each of them was small and frightened and new. The show thinks about time as carefully as it thinks about the self, and it builds a whole strange cosmology to do it. Consider Prismo, one of the most powerful beings in the show, a creature who lives in a timeless room and can grant nearly any wish. The show reveals that Prismo is not a being at all, but a dream, the dream of an ordinary old man sleeping somewhere far away, and that if the man ever wakes, Prismo will simply cease to exist. The most powerful wish granter in the universe is a sleeping stranger's idle daydream, conscious of his own contingency, at peace with the fact that he could end at any moment. It is a startlingly deep image, and it borrows, knowingly, from the oldest dream of cosmic horror, the idea of a sleeping god whose dream we all are. But the show does something gentle with it that the horror tradition never does. It makes the dream kind. Prismo, knowing he is only a dream, knowing he is temporary, spends his brief flickering existence helping people. He chooses to be a good dream while he lasts, and that choice, made by a being with every reason to despair at his own unreality, is one of the show's quietest and most beautiful answers to the question of how to live in time you do not control. Above Prismo's dream sits the largest temporal structure in the show, the great wheel of cyclical time, embodied in the catalyst comet that passes the world again and again across deep history. And in the way the show frames its own ending as a legend told in a far future where Finn and Jake are already ancient myth, the show is obsessed with deep time, with the rising and falling of ages, with how small any single life is against the span of the world, and how the same patterns keep returning in new forms. And this lands the show, whether it knows it or not, on the doorstep of one of Nietzsche's strangest and most demanding ideas, the thought of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche asked you to imagine that you would have to live your life again, exactly as it was, every joy and every humiliation and every loss, infinitely many times. And he posed it as a test. Would the thought crush you? Or could you say yes to it? Could you love your life so completely, embrace your fate so fully, that you would will it to return forever? He called the highest response to this amor fati, the love of one's fate, the ability to look at everything that has happened to you, the suffering included, and say yes, again, all of it. Adventure Time, set on a wheel of recurring ages, full of characters who have lived impossibly long and lost impossibly much, keeps quietly asking its people this question, and the ones it most admires keep answering yes. Marceline, who has every reason to wish her endless life away, learns to say yes to it. Jake, who knows his time is short, says yes to every ordinary afternoon of it. Finn, offered escape from the whole mortal cycle, says yes to staying inside it. The show's deepest figures are the ones who have made peace with time, who have stopped fighting the wheel and started loving their turn on it, however long or short, however full of grief. And the show offers you, the one listening in the dark, the same invitation. Not to escape time, not to defeat it, but to love the particular, finite, unrepeatable turn of it that you have been given so completely that you would take it again. That is what it would mean to be well. The wheel turns whether you bless it or curse it. The only freedom you have is which of those two things you do. If the show has a theory of the healthy soul, it laid it out most explicitly in a run of 8 episodes in its 9th season, in 2017, called Elements, and the theory is older than the show by more than 2,000 years. The premise is that the entire Land of Ooo runs on 4 elemental forces: fire, ice, candy, and slime, and that each one corresponds to a way of being, an emotional temperament. Fire is passion and aggression. Ice is isolation and melancholy. Slime is chaos and overwhelming sociability. Candy is sweetness and harmony, the bright surface that can hide trouble underneath. And the story turns on what happens when the balance between these forces breaks, when one element is allowed to take over completely and swallow everything else. A world tipped entirely into fire becomes rage without rest. A world tipped entirely into ice becomes sorrow without end. A world tipped entirely into candy becomes a forced, mandatory, hollow happiness, which the show, with real insight, presents as the most frightening fate of all. This is almost exactly the ethical philosophy of Aristotle, dressed in cartoon colors. Aristotle argued that virtue is not the maximizing of any single quality, but the finding of a balance, a mean between extremes. Courage is the balance between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is the balance between stinginess and waste. Every virtue is a kind of equilibrium, and the good life, what Aristotle called flourishing, comes from keeping all of your qualities in their proper proportion, none of them allowed to run away with you. The Elements story is this idea made visible. It shows you that a person, like a world, needs all 4 forces in balance, that a life that is only passion, or only melancholy, or only sociability, or only pleasant surface is a life that has lost its equilibrium and become a kind of hell. The healthiest soul is not the one that has purified itself down to a single quality. It is the one that can burn and freeze and merge and smile in their proper measures. The one that contains all 4 elements and keeps any single one of them from taking the throne. And this turns out to be a quietly radical thing to teach, because so much of the world tells you to be more of one thing, to maximize, to specialize, to become pure. The show says the opposite. It says you contain multitudes, and the work of a life is not to choose one of them, but to hold them all in balance. And that balance, not intensity, is what it actually means to be well. The show does not pretend that a balanced life is a painless one, and some of its most serious thinking is about suffering itself, about what to do with pain that cannot be reasoned away. The clearest place it does this is in the long, slow arc of Finn and the grass sword. Finn comes to wield a sword made of living grass, and the grass fuses to his arm, and it will not come off, and what began as a weapon becomes a curse, a green thing growing out of him that he cannot control and cannot remove. Eventually, it cost him his arm entirely, and from the cursed grass, a second being is born, a twisted double of Finn called Fern, made of the hero's own discarded darkness. Many people who have watched the show closely recognize this arc as one of the most honest depictions of depression ever put into a cartoon. A heaviness that attaches itself to you without your consent, that grows out of your own body, that you did not ask for and cannot simply decide to be rid of. That can even take on a shape and a voice and begin to feel like a separate self living inside your life. What makes the show's treatment of this so mature is what it refuses to do with it. It refuses the cheap and common lie that suffering is secretly a gift, that pain is here to teach you a lesson, that everything happens for a reason. There is a strain of philosophy going back to the Stoics and running through Nietzsche that tries to redeem suffering by making it meaningful, by insisting that what does not kill you makes you stronger. And the show is sympathetic to that hope, but it is too honest to fully endorse it. The grass curse does not make Finn stronger. It takes his arm. Fern does not become a lesson. He becomes a tragedy. The show suggests, quietly, that some suffering is just suffering, that not every wound is a teacher, that the demand to find meaning in your pain can itself become a second cruelty laid on top of the first. And in place of the lie that suffering is good for you, it offers something smaller and truer. It offers company. Finn survives the grass sword not by finding its hidden purpose, but by being surrounded, through all of it, by people who loved him and stayed. The show's philosophy of suffering is not that pain is meaningful. It is that pain is survivable sometimes, when you are not alone in it, and that the people who stay with you in the dark are doing the only thing that has ever actually helped. And the proof of that, painfully, is Fern, who suffered the same way and was alone, and so did not survive it whole. The difference between Finn and his shadow was never the amount of pain. It was the presence or absence of others. This is the show refusing, one more time, to let suffering be a private test of individual strength. It insists that whether you make it through often has less to do with your character than with whether anyone was there, and that this should make you both humble about your own survival and merciful toward those who did not manage it. You did not get through your hardest year because you were strong. You got through it because someone was there. And if no one was there, the show says, then your falling apart was not a moral failure. It was a shortage of the one thing that actually keeps people alive, which is each other. That mercy extends in Adventure Time even to its monsters. And this is where the show makes its most demanding ethical claim. The claim that almost no one is beyond understanding. And that understanding is owed even to those who have done terrible things. Look at how the show treats its villains over time. The Ice King, a kidnapper and a nuisance, is revealed to be a brain-damaged, grief-stricken old man who lost himself to a curse. And once you know that, you cannot hate him anymore, you can only ache for him. The Lich, the embodiment of death and the closest thing the show has to pure evil, is reduced to an innocent baby and given a loving home, and the show dares to ask whether even death itself, raised with enough kindness, might choose not to destroy. Almost every antagonist in the show is eventually given a backstory that does not excuse what they did, but does explain it, that reveals the wound underneath the cruelty, the frightened thing inside the frightening one. This is a genuine and difficult moral philosophy, and it cuts against a deep human instinct. We want our villains to be simply evil, because that lets us hate them cleanly, and hating cleanly feels good. The show keeps taking that pleasure away from you. It keeps insisting that the monster has a history, that the cruelty came from somewhere, that the person who hurt others was, very often, someone who was hurt first. And it does not do this to excuse harm. The harm remains real. The Ice King really did frighten people. The Lich really would end the world. The show is not arguing that understanding cancels responsibility. It is arguing something subtler and harder, that you can hold someone responsible and still refuse to stop seeing them as a person. That justice and compassion are not opposites. That the moment you decide another being is beyond all understanding is the moment you give yourself permission to treat them as less than real. The show will not give you that permission. It keeps the humanity of even its worst characters stubbornly in view, and it asks you to do the same, out in your own life, with the people you would find it so much easier to simply hate. That is not a soft message. It is one of the hardest things a person can be asked to do. The show asks it anyway, gently in the voice of a cartoon, over and over until some of it sinks in. Beneath the question of how we treat others lies a lonelier question, the question of how alone we fundamentally are. And the show takes solitude as seriously as it takes connection. The Ice King is its great study in loneliness, and once you understand him, his entire absurd behavior reorganizes itself into something heartbreaking. He kidnaps princesses. For years, this is played as a joke, the bumbling villain and his pointless schemes. But the truth underneath is that the Ice King is the loneliest being in the world, a man who lost everyone, whose mind is too broken to form a real connection, and who is reaching, in the only clumsy way left to him, for company, for someone to be near, for an end to the silence of his ice castle. His villainy is just loneliness that has lost the ability to ask for what it wants. And the show treats this not as an excuse, but as a diagnosis, a portrait of what isolation does to a mind, how it warps the reach for connection into something that drives connection further away. The little machine BMO offers the gentler version of the same truth, and it may be the most quietly profound image in the whole show. BMO talks to its own reflection. It is named the figure in the mirror, treats it as a separate friend, holds conversations with it, plays with it, confides in it. On the surface, this is childlike and sweet. Underneath, it is one of the truest things ever shown about the nature of a mind, because every conscious being is, in the end, alone inside its own head, keeping itself company, narrating its own life to an audience of one. You do it too. You talk to yourself, you rehearse conversations, comfort yourself, argue with yourself, keep yourself company through the long hours when no one else is there. BMO talking to the mirror is just this human universal made visible, the self being its own companion because, at the deepest level, the self is the only companion that never leaves. And the show does not present this as sad. It presents it as a kind of resourcefulness, even a kind of grace, the way a being thrown into existence alone learns to be a friend to itself. We are each of us alone in here, and we each, like BMO, find ways to keep ourselves company anyway. The philosophers call this existential isolation, the unbridgeable gap between one consciousness and another. The show calls it BMO and the mirror, and somehow that is easier to bear. And yet the show insists that the gap, while unbridgeable, can be reached across. And its most beautiful argument for this is a relationship conducted almost entirely without shared language. Jake loves Lady Rainicorn, and Lady Rainicorn speaks only in a language that much of the audience cannot understand, and that several characters in the show cannot understand either. An untranslated stream of words that we are simply not given access to. And it does not matter. Jake understands her, or understands enough, and where understanding fails, love fills the gap. Their relationship, one of the most stable and tender in the entire show, is built across a barrier of language that is never fully removed. This is a real philosophical proposition about the limits of words. There is a tradition running through thinkers like Wittgenstein that worries about how much of another person is locked away behind the imperfect medium of language, how the limits of what we can say might be the limits of what we can share. The show acknowledges the barrier and then quietly steps over it. It suggests that the deepest forms of connection do not actually run through language at all, that you can know someone, truly, through attention and presence and years of shared life, without ever fully translating them, and that the parts of another person you cannot put into words are not the parts you fail to reach, but sometimes the very parts you love best. Jake cannot fully translate Lady. He loves her completely anyway. The show offers this as a model and a comfort. You will never fully understand anyone, not your closest person, not even yourself. And you can love them entirely regardless, because love was never a matter of complete comprehension. It was a matter of staying and attending and reaching across the gap again and again, knowing you will never quite close it, and reaching anyway. For a show built on a mass grave, Adventure Time is remarkably unafraid of death, and its fearlessness is itself a philosophical position worth examining. Death in Ooo is not an ending so much as an address. There is a literal land of the dead ruled by a being simply called death. And there are layered dead worlds stacked beyond the living one, populated and navigable, places you can travel to and sometimes come back from. Jake has died and returned. The boundary between living and dead, like every other boundary in this show, is a membrane rather than a wall. And the effect of all this is to drain death of its terror without ever pretending it does not happen. The show looks straight at mortality and somehow refuses to flinch. There is an ancient argument for exactly this composure, and it comes from the philosopher Epicurus, who said that death is nothing to us. His reasoning was simple and strangely bracing. Where death is, he said, you are not. Where you are, death is not. You will never actually experience your own death, because to experience anything you have to exist, and death is precisely the absence of your existence. So the thing people fear, the state of being dead, is not a state you will ever be in to suffer. The fear of death, Epicurus argued, is therefore a kind of confusion, a dread of something that, by definition, you will never encounter. The show seems to live inside this insight. Its characters face death without the paralyzing terror that grips so much of human life, not because they are brave exactly, but because the show has quietly absorbed the idea that death itself is not the catastrophe we imagine, that it is, at worst, a door, and at best, another room. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the show is wiser than a glib reading of Epicurus because it knows that the real terror of death was never about your own ending at all. It was always about the others. Epicurus can dissolve your fear of your own death, but he cannot touch your grief at the death of someone you love. And grief is the harder problem, the one that does not yield to clever argument. And here the show does not try to argue you out of anything. It simply honors the grief. It lets Marceline mourn. It lets the loss of the people who change or fade or die land with full weight. The show's philosophy of death is therefore double. And the doubleness is the wisdom. About your own death, it counsels a kind of peace, the Epicurean recognition that you will not be there to suffer it, so you may as well spend your living hours unafraid. About the death of others, it counsels no peace at all, only love and presence, and the willingness to grieve, because grief is simply love continuing after its object is gone. And the show would never ask you to give that up. Do not fear your own ending, it says. Do fear and feel the loss of the people you love, because that feeling is the truest evidence that the loving was real. If death is only another room, then the show's obsession with the porousness of reality starts to look less like fantasy and more like a sustained philosophical argument about what is real in the first place. And this is where we return at last to dreams. Recall Finn in the Pillow World, in that 5th season episode where he falls asleep in a fort and wakes, or seems to wake, in another world and lives there a full human lifetime, marries, raises children, grows old, and dies, only to return to Ooo having lost no time at all. The show never tells you whether the Pillow World was real or only a dream. And the longer you sit with it, the more you realize the show is doing this on purpose, that the refusal to answer is the answer, that the show is quietly dismantling the very distinction between a real experience and a dreamed one. Because what exactly made Finn's pillow life less real than his waking one? He felt every year of it. He loved a wife and buried friends and aged into wisdom. The experience from the inside was complete. There is a strain of philosophy running from Berkeley through to certain modern thinkers that questions whether the external world is even the source of our experience. That points out we never actually touch reality directly, only our perception of it, only the felt experience in the mind. And the show, without ever getting technical about it, lands somewhere bracing and kind. It suggests that the realness of an experience does not live in whether it happened in the external world. It lives in whether it was felt. Finn's pillow life was real because he lived it, because it moved him, because he came back changed. And this is not just a clever puzzle. It is a consolation aimed directly at you. Every love you have ever felt, every meaning you have ever made, every inner experience that no one else could see or verify was real, fully real, because you felt it, because it changed you, regardless of whether anyone else could confirm it from the outside. You do not need the universe to witness your inner life in order for it to count. It felt real. You were there. That, the show insists, is the realest thing there is. The show believes goodness is real, not as a decoration but as a genuine force in the world. And it builds this conviction into the very objects of its mythology. Early on, Finn comes into possession of the Enchiridion, an ancient hero's handbook. And the show establishes that the book can only be fully read, fully used, by a hero with a righteous heart. Goodness, in other words, is something the universe of the show can actually detect and respond to. A real property of a person, as real as strength or speed. This is a quietly old-fashioned and beautiful idea in an age that often treats morality as mere opinion or social convention. The show insists that being good is a real thing, that it matters, that the cosmos itself takes note of it. And the way the show develops this maps almost exactly onto what philosophers call virtue ethics, the tradition that runs from Aristotle and asks not which rules to follow, but what kind of person to become. In virtue ethics, you do not become good by memorizing principles. You become good by doing good things, repeatedly, until the doing shapes you, until goodness becomes a habit, a disposition, a part of who you are. Character is built by practice, and the show dramatizes this through Finn, whose heroism is never presented as a fixed gift he was simply born with. It is something he practices, fails at, recommits to, builds slowly over years of choosing, in small unwatched moments, to do the harder right thing. The show even shows you the dark possibility through Finn's hero Billy, the greatest warrior in the history of Ooo, who grows disillusioned and gives up and stops being a hero. Goodness, the show warns, is not a trophy you win once and keep forever. It is a practice you can abandon. The Enchiridion opens for a righteous heart, but hearts do not stay righteous on their own. They have to be kept that way, daily, by effort, by the unglamorous, repeated decision to care when it would be easier not to. Finn's whole life is the argument that you are not good because of what you are. You are good because of what you keep choosing to do today and then again tomorrow for as long as you can manage it. If goodness is a practice and the self is a process and meaning is something we make, then the show needs an answer to the question of where all this happens, of what holds a life together, and its answer is home, though not home as a place. Finn is a human boy raised by dogs. His family is not his species and not his blood. He was taken in and loved by creatures fundamentally unlike him, and they made him who he is. And when, late in the show, Finn finally finds other humans, an entire hidden population of his own kind across the ocean, he does the thing that reveals the show's whole philosophy of belonging. He does not stay. He visits, he learns where he came from, and then he goes home, back to Ooo, back to the magical dog and the candy princess and the vampire queen and the little machine, back to the people who are not his kind and never were, and who are nonetheless entirely his family. This is a real position on one of the oldest questions about identity and belonging. The question of what actually makes a family, what makes a home, what we belong to, and why. The old answer is blood, soil, tribe kind. You belong to the people you came from. The show rejects this almost completely. It argues that belonging is chosen, not inherited, that home is not where you originate, but where you are loved, that family is a thing you build out of whoever happens to be willing to stay. Finn's birth father abandoned him, and his birth species lives across an ocean he chooses not to cross. And none of it matters, because home was never about origin. A magical dog raised a human boy, and the boy grew up and met his own kind and politely, gratefully, went home to his dog. The show offers this as a liberation, especially for anyone who has ever felt that the family they were born into was not where they truly belonged. You are not bound to the people you came from. You get to build your own belonging out of love and proximity and time, and the home you build that way is not a lesser home, a substitute for the real thing. It is the real thing. It may be the only real thing there ever was. There is a way in which the show is not only about growing up, but is itself an act of growing up. And this is one of the strangest and most moving things about it as a philosophical object. When Adventure Time began, it looked like a simple hyperactive cartoon for small children, all sugar and shouting. And across its run, it deepened, slowly, deliberately, growing quieter and sadder and more complex at almost exactly the rate that a child grows into an adolescent and an adolescent into an adult. The show aged with the people watching it. The early episodes are bright and loud because childhood is bright and loud. The later ones are full of memory and loss and moral difficulty, because that is what growing up turns out to be made of. The show was always planning to take you here. It simply waited until you were old enough to follow. This embodies a real and somewhat painful idea about knowledge and innocence, about what is gained and lost as we grow. The child's view of the world is not simply wrong to be replaced by the adult's correct one. The child sees something true that the adult forgets, a directness, a wonder, an unguarded openness to the strangeness and delight of being alive. And the adult sees something true that the child cannot yet grasp, the weight of consequence, the reality of loss, the moral complexity of a world where everyone is carrying something. Wisdom, the show suggests, is not the replacement of the child's view by the adult's. It is the difficult holding of both at once, the retention of wonder alongside the acquisition of weight. The best of the show's characters never lose their capacity for delight even as they take on the full knowledge of how hard the world is. Finn grows up without growing cold. He learns how heavy everything is and keeps adventuring anyway, keeps being amazed anyway, keeps loving the world anyway. That is the rarest and most valuable form of maturity there is. And the show models it for you across a decade, teaching you, episode by episode, that you can know exactly how dark things are and still meet the morning with open eyes. This points to something Socrates understood, that the beginning of wisdom is wonder, that the philosophical life starts not with answers but with the capacity to be amazed and to keep asking. The very name of the show is a clue. It is called Adventure Time, and adventure, properly understood, is the practice of going out to meet the world with curiosity, of treating existence as something to explore rather than merely endure. The characters wander into the unknown not to conquer it, but to discover it. And the show treats this wandering curiosity as one of the highest goods, a way of staying awake to a world that constantly tempts you into sleepwalking. To keep adventuring, in the show's sense, is to keep refusing to let the world become ordinary, to keep finding the strangeness and the wonder in it even after you have seen it many times. That is not childishness. It is the examined life, the awake life. The life that keeps asking what is over the next hill, not out of greed, but out of love for the asking itself. And yet, for all its cosmic scope and its grand adventures, the show keeps insisting that the deepest meaning is found not in the epic, but in the small. And this may be its most quietly subversive teaching. Think of how much of the show is simply ordinary. Jake making a sandwich, and the show treating that sandwich as a genuine work of art, worthy of total attention. Jake playing his viola on a hilltop as the afternoon passes. BMO taking photographs to hold on to small moments. Finn and Jake lying on the floor of the treehouse doing nothing in particular. For a show that contains the end of the world and the rebirth of the cosmos, an extraordinary amount of its running time is devoted to the unremarkable texture of ordinary life. And it is devoted there on purpose, because the show believes that this is where living actually happens. There is a deep idea here about the location of the sacred, an idea that several spiritual and philosophical traditions have reached for, that the holy is not somewhere else, not in the grand and the cosmic and the distant, but right here. In the most ordinary moments, if you are paying attention, the sandwich is sacred if you make it with love. The afternoon is sacred if you are truly present in it. The photograph matters because it honors a moment that would otherwise dissolve into the river of impermanence we began with. The show keeps pulling your attention away from the spectacular and back toward the small, training you to find the meaning not in the rare dramatic peak, but in the daily texture, the breakfast, the song, the friend on the floor beside you. And this is, in the end, a teaching about attention itself. Because the difference between a sacred moment and a wasted one is often nothing more than whether you were actually there for it. Most of life is ordinary. If meaning lived only in the extraordinary, then most of life would be meaningless. A long gray wait between rare peaks. The show refuses this. It insists that the ordinary is where the meaning mostly lives, and that the skill of a good life is the skill of being present enough to notice, of treating the sandwich and the afternoon and the friend with the same attention you would give to the end of the world. Because to the one living it, an ordinary afternoon, fully inhabited, is no smaller than the cosmos. If the show has a single sage, a character who has already arrived at the wisdom the others are still reaching for, it is Jake, and his philosophy is worth taking seriously as a philosophy, because it is more coherent than it first appears. Jake does not worry. Jake does not strive. Jake meets the world as it comes, takes pleasure in small things, refuses to be hurried, and seems, almost always, to be at peace. On the surface, this looks like mere laziness, and the show sometimes plays it that way. But underneath, it is something closer to an ancient way of living, the way described in the Taoist tradition, the practice of Wu Wei, of effortless action, of moving with the grain of things rather than against them, of not forcing, not grasping, not exhausting yourself in resistance to a world that will do what it does regardless. Jake has, without ever studying it, arrived at a kind of natural Taoism, a capacity to flow with existence instead of fighting it. And the show holds him up, gently, as someone who has figured out something the anxious and the striving have not. What Jake understands, and what he keeps trying to teach Finn without ever lecturing, is presence. He knows how to be here, fully, in the afternoon he is actually in, rather than lost in the afternoon he wishes he were having or dreading the one to come. When he makes a sandwich, he is entirely making the sandwich. When he plays his viola, he is entirely playing. When he lies down in a collapsing house to feel it fall, he is completely there for the falling. This is the same capacity that contemplative traditions across the world have spent millennia trying to cultivate, the ability to inhabit the present moment instead of living perpetually in memory and anticipation. And Jake simply has it, the way some dogs simply have it, a gift for being where he is. And the show suggests that this, more than any grand achievement, is the texture of a good life, that eudaimonia, the old Greek word for flourishing, for a life that goes well, is built not out of great accomplishments but out of thousands of ordinary moments fully inhabited. Jake is not a hero in the way Finn is. He will never read the Epicurean, but he may be the wisest character in the show because he has solved the problem the others are all still struggling with, which is simply how to be content to be alive, here, now, in a falling house, on a turning wheel, for the short, bright while that any of us gets. And at the very center of the show, holding everything else together, is the thing the show prizes above all other goods, above adventure, above power, above even love in its romantic form. It is friendship. The bond between Finn and Jake is the spine of the entire series, and the show treats it as the highest and most stabilizing good a life can contain. This too is an old philosophical position. Aristotle, when he cataloged the components of a flourishing life, gave friendship a place of extraordinary importance, and he distinguished the highest kind of friendship from the lesser kinds. There are friendships of utility, where you are useful to each other, and friendships of pleasure, where you enjoy each other's company, and these are real but fragile, lasting only as long as the use or the pleasure does. But the highest friendship, Aristotle said, is the friendship of virtue, where two people are bonded not by what they get from each other, but by a shared commitment to the good, where each wants the other to flourish for the other's own sake, where the friend becomes, in his phrase, another self. Finn and Jake have exactly this. Their friendship is not based on utility, though they are useful to each other, nor merely on pleasure, though they delight in each other. It is based on a shared way of being in the world, a mutual commitment to kindness and adventure and the good, and each of them genuinely wants the other to become the fullest version of himself. Jake wants Finn to grow up well. Finn wants Jake to be happy. They are, in Aristotle's exact sense, another self to each other, so close that the boundary between them blurs, so bonded that the show can use their friendship as the fixed point around which all its chaos turns. And the show's quiet argument made across every episode is that this is the foundation a life is actually built on. Not romance, though romance matters. Not achievement, though achievement has its place. But the deep, stabilizing, virtue-grounded friendship that says, without conditions, I am here. I want you to flourish. I will adventure beside you for as long as we both have, and I will be, for you, another self. Everything else in the show, all the cosmic forces and the lost mines and the falling houses, is held steady by that one bond between a boy and his dog. The show is telling you where to put your weight. Put it on the people who want you to flourish for your own sake. That is the ground that holds. None of the virtues the show prizes would be possible without one that underwrites them all, and the show knows it, which is why it spends so much time on fear and the facing of it. Finn is afraid of things. The show is unusually honest about this for a hero. He has a deep, almost paralyzing fear of the ocean, planted in him by something that happened when he was an infant. And the show does not treat this fear as a weakness to be mocked, but as a real and heavy thing he has to carry, and eventually, confront. Across the series, Finn faces fear after fear, and the show is careful to show that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. The willingness to do the necessary thing while still afraid. Because fearlessness is not actually available to anyone who understands the stakes. This is the classical understanding of courage, and philosophers have long noticed that it occupies a special place among the virtues. Because it is the one that makes the others usable. You can know what is good, you can love rightly, you can understand exactly what you ought to do, and none of it will matter if fear stops you from acting. Courage is the virtue that lets all the other virtues out into the world, and the show frames Finn's growth largely as the slow expansion of his courage, not into recklessness, which is its own failure, the false courage that does not understand danger, but into the genuine article, the measured willingness to feel fear fully and act well anyway. And it ties this beautifully to everything else because the deepest fear the show keeps circling is the fear of loss, the fear of impermanence we began with, the terror that everything ends. The ultimate act of courage in Adventure Time is not facing a monster. It is the willingness to love mortal, fragile, temporary things, knowing they will be lost, and to do it anyway with your whole heart. Unprotected. That is the courage the show admires most. Not the courage to fight, the courage to care in a world where caring guarantees grief. Behind every threat in the show stands one final adversary. And it is not really a monster at all, but an idea. The idea that nothing matters, and the show's confrontation with that idea is the philosophical heart of everything. The Lich, the embodiment of death and extinction, does not want power or revenge. He wants the end of all things. He is nihilism given a body, the living argument that since everything dies, nothing is worth doing, that the only honest response to a doomed universe is to hasten its ending. And behind even the Lich looms Golb, the embodiment of chaos, the dissolving of all meaning and distinction back into formless noise. Together they represent the deepest fear a thinking creature can have, the suspicion that under all our striving and loving, there is only emptiness, that the universe is indifferent, that meaning is an illusion we paint over the void. And here is the most important thing about how the show answers this, because it does not answer the way you might expect. It does not produce a clever argument to prove that life has meaning. It does not refute nihilism on nihilism's own terms, with logic. The show understands that you cannot argue someone out of the void, that the feeling of meaninglessness does not yield to debate. So it does something else entirely. It outlives the void. It answers the claim that nothing matters not with a counterclaim, but with a counter-practice, with thousands of small, accumulated moments that simply are meaningful, undeniably to the people living them. A dog makes his friend a sandwich. Two people who have lost everything sing a song together. A little machine takes a photograph to keep a moment from vanishing. The show stacks these up, hour after hour, until their sheer weight becomes the answer. You cannot prove to a nihilist that the sandwich matters, but you can make the sandwich with love for someone you love, and in the making, the question quietly dissolves, because meaning was never something to be proven, it was something to be done. The Lich says nothing matters, and the show replies across nearly 300 episodes, not with a rebuttal, but with a demonstration, holding up everything that obviously, immediately, undeniably matters to the heart that is living it, and letting the abundance of it drown out the void. You defeat the claim that nothing matters by being so busy loving things that you never finish the argument. That is the show's answer. That is perhaps the only answer there is. If everything ends, as the show insists from its first frame, then the question of what survives us becomes urgent, and Adventure Time has a careful and consoling answer, which it saves for its very last hour. The series finale frames the entire show as a story being told in the deep future, long after Finn and Jake are gone, recounted by a small familiar machine to listeners who were not yet born when any of it happened. The whole series, in its final moments, reveals itself to have been a legend, a tale passed forward across time, kept alive by being told. And this is the show's answer to the problem of mortality it raised at the very beginning. What survives you is not your body, which decays, and not your memory in your own mind, which dies with you. What survives you is the mark you left on others, the love you passed forward, the story of you carried in the hearts of the people who came after, retold, reshaped, gradually becoming myth, but never quite disappearing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This is a genuinely ancient consolation, the idea that a kind of immortality is available to mortal creatures through what they leave behind, through their effect on others, through being remembered and retold. The Greeks called one version of it kleos, the glory that outlives you in the stories people tell. But the show gives it a gentler, more democratic shape. You do not have to be a hero to be carried forward. You only have to have loved someone, to have been kind to someone, to have left a mark on a heart that will outlast your body. The little machine remembers everyone, the great and the small, the heroes and the ordinary friends, and keeps them alive by telling their story. And the show suggests that this is happening all the time, everywhere, that every act of love is quietly depositing you into the memory of another person, building the only kind of afterlife that is actually on offer, the afterlife of having mattered to someone who will carry you forward. You will end, the wheel will turn past you, and the love you gave will keep traveling, from heart to heart, story to story, longer than you can imagine, which is not nothing. It may in fact be everything that was ever available, and it may be enough. For all its darkness, all its apocalypse and lost minds, Adventure Time is finally a hopeful show. And its hope is not naive, which is what makes it worth trusting. Naive hope is hope that has not looked at the hard things. The show has looked at all of them. It has looked at the end of the world, at the loss of the self, at the death of love, at the indifference of the universe, at the suffering that has no redemptive meaning. It has not flinched from any of it. And then, having looked at all of it clearly, it chooses hope anyway. And that earned hope, hope on the far side of despair, is the most durable kind there is. The central image of the whole show is the image of candy growing on a grave, of a bright and tender world rising out of the ruins of a dead one, and that image is the show's entire philosophy of hope compressed into a single picture. The worst already happened, and life came back anyway, stranger and softer than before. The world ended, and then there was a boy, and a dog, and a treehouse, and breakfast. This is the deepest reason the show is set after the apocalypse rather than before it. A story set before the end can offer the cheap hope that the end might not come. The show refuses that comfort. It tells you from the first frame that the end already came, that the catastrophe you fear is not hypothetical but historical, that the worst is not ahead of you but behind you. And then it spends a decade demonstrating that life on the far side of catastrophe is not only possible, but can be beautiful, can be full of love and meaning and wonder, can be worth living completely. This is hope for adults, hope for people who have already lost things, hope for anyone lying awake at the end of a hard year wondering whether the good part is over. The show's answer is the candy on the grave. Something always grows back. It will not be what was lost. It will be its own strange new thing, but it will grow and it will be alive. And if you are willing to tend it, it can be sweet. The world ends and the world continues. Both are true. The show asks you to hold both and to plant something anyway. There is a tension the show holds with unusual grace, the tension between examining life and simply living it. and it embodies the two sides in its two central characters. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living, that a human being has an obligation to question, to think, to understand the terms of their own existence, rather than sleepwalking through it. And Finn is, in his way, the examined life, the one who questions and grows and struggles to understand who he is and what he owes the world. But Jake is the counter-argument, the living rebuke to any philosophy that values thinking over being. Jake does not examine much of anything. He is content. He is present. He enjoys his life without endlessly interrogating it, and the show clearly loves him for it. Clearly thinks he has gotten something right that the anxious, examining mind tends to get wrong. The wisdom the show arrives at is a reconciliation of these two, and it is more subtle than either Socrates or simple contentment alone. It suggests that you should examine your life enough to live it well, enough to choose your values and understand your commitments, and not drift unconsciously into a life you never meant to live. But that there is a point past which examination becomes its own trap, a way of standing outside your own existence and never actually entering it. The over-examined life is also not worth living, because it is barely lived at all, spent in perpetual analysis of a life that is quietly passing by unattended. Finn needs a little of Jake's capacity to simply be, and Jake might benefit from a little of Finn's drive to grow, and the good life lies somewhere in the holding of both. Examined enough to be deliberate, present enough to be real. The show does not resolve this into a formula. It just shows you the two ways of being, side by side, best friends, each incomplete without the other, and lets you feel that wisdom is not the victory of one over the other, but the friendship between them. The examined life and the lived life walking together through the Land of Ooo, each keeping the other honest, and running underneath all of it from the first episode to the last is the deepest current in the show, the one that connects every theme we have touched, the simple and inexhaustible fact of change. The show is obsessed with the way things change, the way characters grow and drift and become unrecognizable, the way the bright early seasons give way to the complex later ones, the way nothing in Ooo ever holds still. There is a fragment from the ancient philosopher Heraclitus that captures the show's whole sensibility, the observation that you cannot step into the same river twice, because the river is always flowing, always different, and so, by the time you step in again, are you? Everything flows, nothing stays fixed. The self that began the show is not the self that ends it, and the world that began it is not the world that ends it either. The show treats this with enormous tenderness, especially in its handling of nostalgia and the longing to go back. Many of its characters and many of its viewers feel the pull to return to an earlier, simpler time, to the golden early days before everything got complicated and sad. And the show understands that pull, and grieves alongside it, and then gently insists on the truth that Heraclitus saw, which is that you cannot go back, not because the past was not real, but because the river has moved on and so have you. The early seasons were real and they are gone. Your childhood was real and it is gone. The people you loved who have changed are still real, and the versions of them you miss are gone. And the show offers, in place of the impossible return, the only thing actually available, which is to step fully into the river as it is now, to love the current version of your life and your people, even as you grieve the versions that have passed. To accept that change is not a betrayal of what was, but the very condition of being alive at all. A thing that does not change is a thing that is dead. The flowing is the living. And the only way to honor what the river was is to keep wading into what it has become, again and again, knowing it will never be the same river, knowing you will never be the same person, and finding in that endless flowing, not loss alone, but the strange continuous gift of being a creature who gets to change it all. There is one more value the show takes more seriously than almost any other work of art dares to, and it is a value our culture tends to dismiss as childish, which is play, joy, fun, silliness for its own sake. The show is, after all, frequently and gloriously silly, full of nonsense and games and absurdity, and it would be easy to mistake this for the absence of seriousness rather than a form of it. But consider the little machine again, BMO, and what we learn about why BMO exists. BMO was built by its inventor for one specific purpose above all others: to understand fun, to know how to play. Of all the things a creator could build into a being, this is what mattered most to Mo: the capacity for play. And the show clearly agrees that this is no small thing, that the ability to play is close to the center of what makes a life worth living. There is a tradition of thought that takes play with exactly this seriousness, that sees play not as a break from meaningful life, but as one of its highest expressions, a space where we are most free, most creative, most fully ourselves. Play is the activity we do for no reason beyond itself, not to survive, not to achieve, not to impress, but simply for the joy of the doing. And in that purposelessness lies a strange purity, When Finn and Jake play, when BMO invents a game, when the characters are silly together for no reason at all, the show is not taking a break from its philosophy. It is enacting it. Because if meaning is something we make rather than find, and if the universe owes us no purpose, then play, the free creation of joy for its own sake, is one of the purest forms of meaning-making there is. A small, defiant act of generating delight in a world that does not require it. The show insists that you are allowed to be silly, that joy is not frivolous, that the capacity to play is not something to be outgrown, but something to be protected. A piece of childhood worth carrying into every age. The wisest machine in the show was built to understand fun. The show thinks that is what wisdom is partly for. There is a scale to Adventure Time that most cartoons never even reach for. A willingness to pull back until its characters are tiny figures against the vastness of deep time in a multiverse of countless dimensions. And the strange thing is what this does to the heart. You might expect that being shown how small you are, how brief, how lost in an immensity of space and time in parallel worlds, would feel crushing. And sometimes the show lets it feel that way for a moment, but more often the cosmic perspective in this show produces something closer to peace. The odd relief that comes from seeing your troubles against a backdrop large enough to hold them. There is a name for this in philosophy. Spinoza spoke of seeing things under the aspect of eternity, of lifting your gaze from your immediate anxieties to the vast calm view of the whole, and finding in that wider seeing a release from the tyranny of the small and the urgent. The show keeps offering you that wider seeing. It shows you the world before the war, and the world 1,000 years after, and the great wheel of ages turning, and being so old and so large that whole civilizations are momentary to them. And rather than making the boy and his dog meaningless, this immensity makes them precious, the way a single warm lit window looks more beautiful, not less, against a vast dark sky. The cosmic scale does not cheapen the small life. It frames it. It surrounds the ordinary afternoon with enough darkness that the afternoon begins to glow. And the show seems to understand that this is one of the great consolations available to a thinking creature, the ability to step back to see your one small life inside the enormous turning of things, and to feel instead of despair, a quiet gratitude that you got to be here at all. A brief warm window in the long cold night of the cosmos, lit for a little while, loved for a little while, and that this is not nothing, that this is in fact astonishing. And against all that vastness, the show keeps making one small gesture, again and again, until you realize it is the gesture the whole show is built out of. It is the gesture of kindness toward whatever stranger wanders into the frame. Finn and Jake spend their days helping creatures they have never met, odd and broken and frightening beings who appear out of the wilderness of Ooo with some need or some sorrow. And the heroes, more often than not, simply help. They do not first ask whether the stranger deserves it. They do not run a calculation. They meet the need that is in front of them because it is in front of them, because someone is suffering and they are there. There is a deep ethics in this, the ethics that some philosophers have located in the simple encounter with the face of another, the way the mere presence of a suffering other makes a claim on you, calls you to responsibility, before any reasoning begins. The show lives by this ethic. It treats the appearance of a stranger in need not as an interruption of the adventure, but as the adventure itself, the actual content of a good life. And it extends this hospitality to the strangest and least deserving, to monsters, to villains, to the Ice King knocking at the door, to beings no reasonable person would welcome. The show keeps insisting that the measure of you is how you treat the odd, inconvenient, undeserving stranger who needs something from you, and that a life spent answering those small claims of kindness, one creature at a time, is not a small life at all, but very close to the best life there is. In a universe this vast and this indifferent, the show says the most meaningful thing you can possibly do is also the simplest. Be kind to the next strange creature who needs you. That is the whole assignment. That is enough to fill a life. We have talked about the show as a serious thing, a philosophical thing, and it is. But it would be a betrayal of the show to leave out the obvious fact that it is also relentlessly funny, and that its humor is not separate from its wisdom, but part of it. Adventure Time laughs constantly, at itself, at its characters, at the strangeness of existence. And this laughter is not a distraction from the depth. It is one of the deepest things about it, because there is a kind of wisdom that can only be expressed as humor, a way of holding the absurdity of being alive that is too true for a straight face. The universe is vast and indifferent, and everything ends. And one entirely valid response to that, maybe the sanest response, is to laugh, not the bitter laugh of despair, but the warm laugh of a creature who has seen how strange it all is and decided to be delighted by the strangeness rather than crushed by it. The philosophers do not talk about this enough, but the comic spirit is its own form of courage. It takes a certain bravery to be silly in the face of the void, to make a joke while the house is falling, to find the absurdity of existence funny rather than only frightening. The show is full of characters who do this, who meet the strangeness of their world with delight, who play and joke and laugh their way through an existence that, looked at coldly, offers plenty of reasons not to. And the show suggests that this is not denial. The characters who laugh are not pretending the darkness is not there. They have seen it, all of it, and they have chosen to laugh anyway, which is a different and harder thing than laughing because you have not yet noticed the dark. There is an old idea that comedy and tragedy are not opposites but neighbors, that they are two ways of looking at the very same facts, and that the difference is mostly a matter of distance and angle. The loss of the self is a tragedy when you look at it through Marceline's eyes as she watches Simon fade. The same facts, the bumbling, confused Ice King knocking on doors, are played for comedy, and the comedy does not cancel the tragedy, it sits right on top of it. And the two together are truer than either would be alone. The show is a master of this double vision, of letting you laugh and ache at the same moment. And in teaching you that double vision, it teaches you something essential about how to survive being a person. You will not get through this on solemnity alone. You will need to laugh at the absurdity at yourself, at the sheer cosmic strangeness of having been born a fragile mortal creature on a turning rock, in an enormous dark, and the laughter will not be a failure to take it seriously. The laughter will be a sign that you have taken it as seriously as it can be taken, and survived the taking, and come out the other side still able to be delighted. The show laughs all the way through its own sad story, and it invites you to do the same with yours. Because a life met with humor is not a life taken lightly. It is a life held exactly right. Which leaves one last question, the one that sits underneath all the others. The question of whether existence itself, with all its loss and all its ending, was worth it at all. It is the question a thoughtful person eventually arrives at, lying awake, tallying the griefs against the joys, wondering whether being born was a gift or an imposition. And Adventure Time, for all that it stares directly at suffering, comes down finally and unmistakably on the side of gratitude. The show is grateful to exist. You can feel it in every frame, in the loving attention it pays to small things, in the tenderness with which it treats even its saddest characters, in its refusal to end on despair. The show has looked at everything: the apocalypse, the lost minds, the deaths, the indifference of the cosmos, and its verdict is that it was worth it. That being here, even briefly, is a gift rather than a burden. This is not the easy gratitude of someone who has not suffered. It is the hard gratitude of someone who has suffered and chosen thankfulness anyway, which is the only kind worth anything. The characters who are wisest in the show are not the ones who have avoided pain. They are the ones who have endured it and come out the other side still able to say yes to their own lives, still able to be glad they were born, still able to find the morning beautiful. Marceline, who has lost more than anyone, learns to love her endless life. Jake, who knows his time is short, treasures every ordinary day of it. Simon, when he briefly returns to himself, does not curse the centuries he lost. He is simply grateful to be, for a moment, himself again. There is a phrase for this disposition: the love of one's fate, the ability to embrace your life exactly as it has been, the suffering included, and to want it rather than merely endure it. It is one of the highest achievements a person can reach, and it cannot be faked or rushed. It comes when it comes, on the far side of grief, as a kind of grace. And the show models it for you, gently, across its whole run, teaching you not to demand that life be painless before you are willing to love it, but to love it as it is, painful and brief and uncertain and beautiful. To meet your one strange, unrepeatable existence with thankfulness rather than complaint. Because here is the thing the show seems to know in its bones: you did not have to exist. The overwhelming likelihood against the vastness of all the things that could have been was that you would never be born at all, that this particular consciousness, yours looking out of your particular eyes, would simply never have happened. And yet, here you are, improbably, briefly, against staggering odds, you exist. You get to be here to taste the sandwich, to hear the music, to love the people beside you, to lie in the dark and listen to a story about a boy and his dog. The fact that it ends does not erase the miracle that it began. The show keeps pointing at this, quietly, underneath everything, the sheer unlikely gift of having been allowed to exist at all. And it asks you to hold that gift the way the candy people hold their fragile lives, lightly, gratefully, spending the brief bright while you have not in fear of its ending, but in wonder that it ever started. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That gratitude is the show's final emotional resting place, the ground beneath all its philosophy. Everything ends, and it was a gift to have been here, and both are true. and the second one is the one to fall asleep on. You exist. Against all odds, for a little while you get to be alive in a world with sandwiches and music and people who love you. Whatever else is true, that was worth it. The show is sure of it. By the end, watching closely, so are you. There is one more thing the show quietly honors, and it is the thing you are doing right now, which is resting. For all its adventures, Adventure Time is full of stillness, of characters doing nothing in particular, lying in the grass, watching clouds, sitting together in comfortable silence. The show never treats these moments as wasted time, as gaps between the real events. It treats them as some of the most real events there are. In a world that measures a life by its productivity and its achievements, the show keeps insisting on the value of simply being, of stopping, of letting the afternoon pass without trying to wring anything from it. This too is an old piece of wisdom, the understanding that rest is not the absence of life, but part of its fullness, that a person who cannot be still has not yet learned how to be alive. The contemplative traditions all knew this, building silence and stillness into the center of their practice, understanding that something essential only arrives when you stop chasing and let yourself simply rest in what is. Jake knows it. The candy people, between their parties, know it. And the show, in its gentle way, gives you permission to know it too, to put down the endless striving, to stop, to rest, to let yourself be still and held and quiet, the way you are being quiet now, listening in the dark. So let that be part of what you carry from all of this, that it is allowed to rest, that the still moments are not the empty ones, that lying here doing nothing, letting the day go, is not a failure to live but one of the truest forms of living there is. The show would approve of exactly this, of you, here, at the end of a long day, finally still. So gather all of it together now, in the quiet the way you would gather the threads of a long conversation late at night before sleep. The show began by teaching you impermanence, that everything ends, and that this is the condition of meaning rather than its enemy. It taught you that the self is not a fixed thing you have, but a fragile process you undergo, built and lost plank by plank, with only your love surviving the subtraction. It taught you that meaning is not found but made, forged daily against the silence of an indifferent universe. It taught you that love persists past memory, that the good life is built of ordinary moments fully inhabited, that goodness is a practice and not a possession, that home is chosen and not inherited, that friendship is the ground that holds, that courage is the willingness to love mortal things anyway, that nothing matters until you make it matter and then it matters completely, that change is the living and the flowing is the gift, and that play and joy are not childish things to be set aside, but among the highest expressions of a free mind. It taught you all of this in the voice of a cartoon, so gently that you may not have noticed you were being handed a complete philosophy of how to live. And that disguise is worth pausing on, because it is not incidental to the show's philosophy, but central to it. There is a reason these truths arrive wearing the costume of a candy-colored cartoon about a boy and his dog. And the reason is that you could not have heard them otherwise. If someone sat you down and announced that they were going to lecture you about mortality, the dissolution of the self, the indifference of the universe, and the inevitability of loss, you would brace yourself. You would put up the defenses we all keep ready for anyone who tries to tell us hard things directly. But a cartoon slips past those defenses. You let your guard down because it is silly, because it is for children, because it is just a fun show about adventures. And while your guard is down, the show plants its real cargo, the impermanence and the grief and the love and the meaning, deep enough that it takes root before you notice it is there. By the time the hard episodes arrive, the ones that make grown adults weep, you are already inside the show's world, already attached, already open, and the truths land in a heart that has been gently pried open by years of delight. This is an old and honorable method. The deepest teachers have often wrapped their hardest lessons in stories, in parables, in myths and fables and tales told to children. Because a truth that would bounce off the front of the mind can sometimes slip in through the side door of a story. Adventure Time is a parable that lasted a decade. A Trojan horse of meaning rolled into the territory of childhood. And what it smuggled in was not a doctrine, but a sensibility, a way of meeting existence, a quiet and durable wisdom about how to be a fragile creature in a world that ends. It taught a generation of children and the adults watching beside them how to feel the weight of being alive without being crushed by it. And it did this so gently, so disguised as fun that most of them will carry the lessons for the rest of their lives without ever quite being able to say where they learned them. That is the highest thing a piece of art can do. Not to tell you how to live, but to change, quietly, the texture of how you see, so that years later you find yourself meeting a loss or a change or an ordinary beautiful afternoon with a steadiness you did not know you had. And somewhere underneath it, faint and warm, is a boy and a dog and a treehouse, and the candy growing on the grave. There is a tension the show never fully resolves, and is wiser for leaving open, between loving the world and clinging to it, between caring deeply and holding lightly, and it is worth dwelling on because it is one of the central problems of any thoughtful life. We have said that the show teaches you to love mortal things fully, knowing they will be lost. But there is an old and serious objection to this, voiced most clearly in the Buddhist traditions, which is that attachment is precisely the source of suffering, that the reason loss hurts is that we cling, and that the path to peace runs through learning to hold everything loosely, to love without grasping, to let things go as they go. And the show contains both of these impulses, and lets them sit in tension, embodied in different characters. The Ice King is attachment gone wrong, a being of pure clinging, grasping desperately at companionship, at princesses, at a past he cannot recover, and his clinging is the direct cause of his misery. Jake is the opposite, a creature who holds everything lightly, who loves his life without grasping at it, who can enjoy the afternoon precisely because he is not clutching it, and who is, not coincidentally, the most at peace. The show seems to land in a place that honors both the loving and the letting go, and the place it lands is subtle and hard-won. It suggests that the goal is not to stop loving in order to avoid the pain of loss, because a life without attachment is a life without love, and that is no life at all. But it also suggests that there is a difference between loving something and clutching it, between holding a thing dearly and holding it in a stranglehold. Jake loves his family completely and still holds them loosely, still lets them be free, still does not try to freeze the river to keep it from flowing. The Ice King wants to possess, to keep, to prevent loss by force, and this destroys the very thing he reaches for. The show's quiet teaching is that you can love with your whole heart and still open your hands, that the deepest love is not the tightest grip, but the most generous one, the love that wants the beloved to be free even at the cost of losing them, the love that can say, like Marceline learning to say across 1,000 years, everything stays even as it changes, even as it goes. Love fully, hold loosely. These are not contradictions. They are the two hands of the same wisdom, and the work of a life is learning to use both at once. Underneath the question of how to hold the world lies the oldest philosophical command of all, carved over the temple at Delphi, the two-word instruction that Socrates made the foundation of all his thinking: know thyself. And Adventure Time is, from beginning to end, a series of journeys towards self-knowledge, some triumphant and some tragic, and it treats the knowing of oneself as both the hardest and the most necessary work a person can do. Finn's entire arc is a long, halting movement toward understanding who he is, where he came from, why he fears what he fears, what his abandonment did to him, what kind of person he wants to become in response. He does not arrive at this knowledge easily or all at once. It comes in pieces, often painful ones, and each piece costs him something. But the show presents this gradual, difficult self-understanding as the very substance of growing up, the work that turns a reactive child into a deliberate adult. And the show sharpens the value of self-knowledge by showing you its opposite. In the most tragic form imaginable, the Ice King does not know himself. He cannot. The crown has taken not just his memories, but his capacity to understand what he has lost, so that he lives in a fog, unable to grasp the shape of his own tragedy, performing a self that is not really there. His is the horror of the examined life made impossible, a man robbed of the ability to know himself, and the show treats this as one of the deepest deprivations a being can suffer. Worse in some ways than death, because at least the dead were once whole. To watch the Ice King is to understand by its absence how precious and how fragile self-knowledge is. How much of your dignity as a person depends on being able to look inward and find someone there who can be known. And the show gently insists that this work, the work of knowing yourself, is worth doing while you still can, that you should not wait, that you should turn and look at who you actually are, at what you fear and what you love and what you are running from, because the capacity to do so is not guaranteed, because there are crowns of many kinds that can take it from you, and because the unexamined depths of a person do not stay quiet. They surface eventually as Fern, as the Ice King's confusion, as the darkness that grows from the parts of yourself you refuse to face. Know yourself, the show says, not because it is comfortable, but because the alternative is to be ruled by the parts of you that you would not look at, and that is the one form of madness no crown is required to produce. If knowing yourself is the foundation, then forgiveness is one of the highest things the self can do, and Adventure Time treats forgiveness with a seriousness and a precision that most stories never attempt. Forgiveness runs all through the show. Marceline forgives Simon for becoming the Ice King, for losing himself, for forgetting her, though none of it was ever fully his fault. Finn must find a way to forgive his father Martin for abandoning him, and must find a way to forgive Fern, his own shadow, for the harm Fern causes. And the show is careful in each case to show what forgiveness actually is, because it is so often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not pretending the harm did not happen. It is not deciding the wound did not matter. It is not even necessarily reconciliation, the restoring of the broken bond. Marceline forgives Simon and still grieves what was lost. Finn forgives Martin and still does not get the father he wanted. What the show understands is that forgiveness is something you do for yourself as much as for the other person. The laying down of a weight you have been carrying. The decision to stop letting the harm continue to define you. To forgive is to refuse to be permanently organized around your injury. To release the grip of resentment, not because the other person has earned it, but because you deserve to be free of it. And the show shows you the cost of not forgiving too, in characters who cannot lay their grievances down, who calcify around old wounds. Forgiveness in Adventure Time is not a soft or sentimental thing. It is one of the hardest and most courageous acts a person can perform. The act of choosing your own freedom over the grim satisfaction of your grudge. Of choosing to keep your heart open in a world that has given you every reason to close it. And the show suggests that this is available even when reconciliation is not, that you can forgive someone you will never trust again, release someone you will never get back, free yourself from a harm whose author will never apologize. That is a mature and difficult teaching, and the show offers it without ever once making forgiveness sound easy, because it knew that it is not. Threaded through everything is the show's quiet meditation on art itself, on why we make things, and this is perhaps the most self-aware dimension of a deeply self-aware show. Adventure Time is full of artists. Marceline writes and plays music, pouring her 1,000 years of grief and love into songs. Simon, even after the crown has taken him, writes stories, inventing whole worlds where the lonely are loved. BMO takes photographs, freezing moments against the current of time. The show is, in this sense, art about art, a made thing that keeps depicting the act of making, and it has a clear and moving theory about why creatures make art at all. They make it against impermanence. They make it to hold what would otherwise be lost, to fix a moment, a feeling, a person, in a form that can outlast the moment itself. Marceline's songs keep her mother alive, keep Simon alive, keep 1,000 years of loss from simply vanishing into the void. Simon's stories give him, for the length of the telling, the life the crown stole from him. BMO's photographs are small acts of defiance against the river of change, declarations that this moment happened, that it mattered, that it deserves to be kept. And in this, the show reveals what it believes art is for, which is the same thing it believes love is for, the holding of the impermanent, the refusal to let the things that matter disappear without a trace. We began this whole long meditation with impermanence, with the truth that everything ends. Art is the human answer to that truth. The way we reach back into the flowing river and pull something out and hold it up and say, this was real, this was beautiful, let it stay a little longer. The show is itself an example of exactly what it describes. It is a made thing that holds, that has kept a generation's childhood from vanishing, that will go on holding moments and meanings long after its makers are gone. To make art, the show suggests, is to perform the deepest possible act of love toward a world that does not last. And the impulse to create is not vanity, but tenderness, the tenderness of a mortal creature trying to keep something, anything, from being entirely lost. And the things art tries to hold are, so often, bodies, because we are not floating minds but creatures of flesh, and the show never lets you forget it. Adventure Time is intensely physical, full of bodies that stretch and morph and break and heal, and at the center of this is Jake, whose entire nature is the fluidity of the body, who can become any shape, any size, any form. The show plays this for comedy constantly, but underneath the comedy is a real reckoning with embodiment, with the fact that you are not separate from your body, but are in some deep sense your body, and that the body is mortal, changing, vulnerable, the site of both your greatest pleasures and your eventual end. Finn loses an arm. Jake ages. The candy people break. The body is where impermanence becomes most personal, most undeniable. The place where the falling house we talked about is your own. And yet the show does not treat the body as a prison or a burden the way some philosophies have. It treats the body as a source of joy, of connection, of the very sensory richness that makes life worth living. The sandwich tastes good because Jake has a tongue. The hug comforts because there are arms. The music moves because there are ears and a body to feel the rhythm in. The show celebrates embodiment even as it mourns the body's mortality, holding, once again, two truths at once, that the body will fail you, and that the body is also the instrument through which every good thing you will ever experience must come. To be embodied is to be doomed and to be alive, and these are the same condition, and the show asks you to inhabit your body fully, joyfully, while you have it, precisely because you will not have it forever. Be in your body the way Jake is in his, completely, playfully, gratefully, because it is the only one you get, and because the falling of it, when it comes, is the price of having been here at all, and it is a price worth paying. So gather all of it together now, in the quiet, the way you would gather the threads of a long conversation late at night. The show taught you impermanence, that everything ends, and that the ending is the condition of meaning rather than its enemy. It taught you that the self is a fragile process, built and lost plank by plank, with only your love surviving the subtraction. It taught you that meaning is made, not found, forged daily against an indifferent universe. It taught you that love persists past memory, that the good life is built of ordinary moments fully inhabited, that goodness is a practice, that home is chosen, that friendship is the ground that holds, that courage is the willingness to love mortal things anyway, that nihilism is answered not with argument but with breakfast, that change is the living and the flowing is the gift, that play and forgiveness and art and the body are all forms of the same tenderness toward a world that does not last. It taught you all of this disguised as a cartoon, so gently you may not have noticed you were being handed a complete philosophy of how to live, which returns us at the very end to where we began, to a dog lying down inside a collapsing house on a hilltop, deciding to feel a building die. Remember Jake the Brick? He did not try to save the house, and he did not run from it, and he did not look away. He lay down inside the falling thing and gave it his complete attention, and narrated what he felt, calmly, tenderly, without fear. And the whole Land of Ooo stopped to listen because everyone recognized what they were hearing. They were hearing someone show them how to be present at an ending. They were hearing someone be unafraid of the fall. That is the whole show. That is the whole philosophy compressed into one quiet image. Because you too are lying inside a collapsing house. Your life is the house. The world is the house. Everything you love is part of the structure, and the structure is coming down slowly, all the time. And there is nothing you can do to stop it, because impermanence is not a problem to be solved, but the condition of being alive. And the show has spent a decade and these 2 hours teaching you the only real response there is, the one Jake found by accident on that hill. Do not flee the falling. Do not pretend it is not happening. Lie down inside your one collapsing house, your mortal life in its mortal world, and give it your complete attention. Notice the wind through the broken boards. Notice the small creatures taking shelter. Notice the people beside you, the ones who will fall when you do. And narrate it to yourself, to each other, with tenderness instead of terror, because the falling, fully attended to and fully loved, turns out not to be only a horror. It turns out to be also unbearably beautiful, and the beauty and the falling are the same thing, and always were. The house comes down. It comes down for Jake, and for Finn, and for Simon, and for Marceline, and for the candy people at their party, and for you, lying in the dark listening to this. Everything ends. The self dissolves. The universe stays silent. And in the middle of all of it, a dog made his friend a sandwich, and meant it, and that was enough. And it is still enough. And it will be enough long after the house has finished falling and the grass has grown over all of it, and some small bright machine in the far green future is telling the story of how once, in a world that had already ended, a few fragile creatures loved each other completely on their way down and made it look, for anyone paying attention, like the most worthwhile thing there has ever been to do. That is adventure time, read as the philosophy it always quietly was. And it is a good thing to carry with you down into sleep, the knowledge that the falling can be met with love, that the love is real, and that it was always enough. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.